Americans want identity cards to be made mandatory for voting. Americans want only eligible voters to cast their ballot. Americans do not want to be generalized into categories. Yet, the Democrats want IDs to go and just about anyone to be eligible to vote. Democrats want to put black Americans in a stereotypical box. Democrats want black Americans to stay where they are and not progress. But the blacks have understood the Democrats' game and are now voicing their support for having IDs made mandatory for voting. Hi and welcome to TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I am your host Sanbir, and in this video we'll tell you how Democrats are completely oblivious and ignorant of the ground realities in the United States. At a time when a fierce debate rages on in America over the new Georgia law which seeks to streamline and formalize the voting process, it becomes necessary to have a close look at available statistics. Do Americans support formalization of the voting process? Are they comfortable with being asked to show their identity cards during voting? After all, such questions will determine whether the Republican state of Georgia has done the right thing, irrespective of the cries of Democrats from across the country who find their comfortable and convenient echo chamber shaken. However, has anyone really consulted people of color, particularly the blacks, over what they would like to see reformed in America's election process? The answer is a gigantic no, for how can blacks have any form of identification documents? The Democrats have generalized and stereotyped blacks as a people who are backward, uneducated, poor and not in possession of any documents. So, when Americans were actually asked whether IDs should be made mandatory for voting, a poll released by Rasmussen Reports last month found that 75% of them believe photo identification should be presented before voting and that 69% of black voters support voter ID laws. The polling also showed that only 21% oppose voter ID laws. Broken down by party, 60% of Democrats support showing an ID to vote compared to 89% of Republicans. The US Congress, meanwhile, is also working to have the H.R. 1 bill passed, which seeks to further liberalize the election process and make it a fertile ground for all sorts of mishaps. The bill would remove several restrictions on voting, proposing expanding the right to vote to felons, allowing people to vote with an affidavit in place of a valid ID, and creating a nationwide automatic voter registration system. This, despite the overwhelming support which prevails in America on the question of IDs being required for voting. The For the People Act, which would loosen requirements on both registering to vote and voting, shows just how disconnected Democrats are from the ground realities in the US. According to the latest YouGov and The Economist poll, Americans as a whole support requiring a photo ID in order to vote absentee, 53% to 28%. And Georgians are even more supportive. 74% of registered voters in the UGA or AJC poll supported the idea of voters including a copy of their photo ID or other documentation in order to vote by mail. Only 22% were opposed to the said idea. In another national poll conducted by Selzer and Company and Grinnell College, 56% of American adults favored keeping laws that require people to show a photo ID before voting, while just 36% wanted to eliminate them. Despite Americans wanting ID cards to be mandated for voting, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives passed the H.R. 1 bill. On the issue, former President Donald Trump said, "The media might want to forget what happened in 2020. I haven't. We're not going to forget what happened, and we got to stop this bill." The bill, by the way, would also reduce the number of members of the Federal Election Commission from 6 to 5, making the commission a tool for Democrats to conduct elections and declare results as they deem fit. While Democrats pass their own outrageous bill in the House, how they gather the temerity to attack Georgia for its own voting law remains incomprehensible. At the heart of the Democrats trying to keep elections informal, loose, and easy to tamper with lies a palpable sense of ownership over persons of color and the blacks. Democrats consider themselves the messiahs of blacks, who simply cannot have independent opinions. Well, guess what? Blacks have just overwhelmingly sided with the voter ID proponents and are themselves willing to vote by showing their own IDs. As such, Joe Biden might want to get down his senseless high horse and try to capture the ground sentiment in America.